Ilya, thank you so much for joining me again on 20-Minute Playbook. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
So this should be fun. In the next 20 minutes, I'll ask you, 10 simple questions. And the idea is to try to learn as much about you and a bit more about your background. And obviously, we just spent, a lot of time diving into what you're building at Near. For anyone that's listening, go and check out near.org. And I'll share at the end of this a way to go and listen to that interview, but it was fascinating. We always start by asking for a recent fascination. What have you been fascinated by? What have you been thinking about recently that you can't get out of your brain?
I mean, honestly, social graph, how to design social graph in Web3. I think between Elon Musk and Twitter whole situation, and then kind of from our side, like with Unchained Fund, it's been a very needed component. Like what is because like even for when you think of engaging with someone, if you have their Twitter, you can go and see who else is following them, what they're saying. Like you have this kind of interesting context on the person, which right now you don't like anywhere else. Like if you go on Telegram. And at the same time, it's fully controlled by Twitter. Somebody can close their person's account.
They don't open that up and let you use it the way you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, like how do we transport that, make it programmable as well, like for developers to build on, and then at the same time, how do we do it, right? Like because building it's challenging to build for scale, but it's possible. Getting people to use it is way harder, right? And so really trying to figure out what are the techniques we can use to get people to use something that's decentralized that has kind of this inherent values, but maybe doesn't have face value, that people will start using right away. So there's some ideas that I have that I'll be sharing soon.
That's so cool. And I'm guessing that would show up as a primitive that anyone in the Near ecosystem could use in whatever they're building.
Exactly. I mean, potentially any ecosystem. Yeah, it's really kind of generic primitive. I mean, it uses near account model just as a basis, but
That would be so cool to be able to have. I mean, even just as a developer, to be able to have that as a tool that you can freely be able to use, I think would be amazing. When you think about, business leadership, and I know that might sound a little bit silly, but at the end of the day, you founded, I think, a really important project. You're still a big force in building it. So when you think about that, building Near all the things that you do, what do you think of as your superpowers? Obviously, you have a very technical background. You obviously now do a lot of non-technical work, just connecting people, helping spur innovation and people in the ecosystem. What are your superpowers and how do you use those daily?
originally it was a lot of context switching, and I mean it still is. So I think like when we're building the protocol and also doing like building layer one is pretty much an impossible task. Like I really like every single time I see new people trying to build layer one, I'm like, well, uh, and so you need to switch context a lot, right? Like, I would be like debugging some core protocol code and then answering to someone about like a fundraise and then, signing some legal documents and then discussing, how do we like set up a foundation and all this. And so this continues. And so I'm doing less of like coding side, but a lot more than now. I just work with a lot of projects at the same time, kind of potentially like 20 projects in 1 week, having calls with them, trying to help them and understand what they're doing. I think the fact that I'm technical, that I do know how protocol works, is obviously allows me to be creative with solutions, right? So in a way, kind of allowing like suggesting people new ideas and ways how they can build on top of Near, or like how they can use Near for their problems. Yeah, those two are the main ones.
No one's ever mentioned context switching, but it makes total sense, especially in the context of what you described. Having to, when you're, leading a project that has a bunch of different pieces, you obviously need to have that as an ability. I want to ask a question around mentors or, figures that you've learned from. So these can be like explicit mentors, people that you've worked with that you just admire and you learn a lot from. It can be people you don't even know, but that you kind of draw on from inspiration. What, can you share mentors or figures that have had an impact on you in what you learned from them or the mark that they had on you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few people. I would say that kind of at Google, like all my managers were a very interesting, very different people, which I've learned a lot from. And all of them went out to start their own company. Actually, all like it was three different managers. All of them have very successful company right now. And so like really learning a wide variety from how to approach management of other people, how to approach kind of this very like more technical leadership as well. And so that's this is three different people. So like those things have been really fundamental. I think the for the past year, I've had a mentor who's been kind of very helpful, and I think kind of general sense. I mean, more of a recommendation for everybody else is find someone who's kind of few years ahead of you, like not too far, but like 2 3 years ahead of you, because those are people who still remember what they were doing in your position, and so they will be able to give you the most kind of useful advice, and so and you can work with them kind of more closely on that. And so that's been doing that. It's been very helpful and kind of powerful. I'm not big on kind of idols where you're like, oh, that person is my idol type of thing. Some people are interesting. I've read a lot of biographies of other people, but it's more of a like either situational, like how to resolve some situation, or kind of is their goals and interests are something that I should incorporate, right? That's kind of the things, the way I think about it.
Yeah. Well, it's great advice as well too to find somebody who's 2 to 3 years ahead, in big part because they still remember what it's like to be where you are now, and they can obviously help you in that state. They can help you figure out what to do next. That's really powerful advice. Is there a favorite quote or anecdote you have about being a founder or engineer? Or and in this, typically the idea here is there kind of a euphemism? Is there a point of view? Is there a quote you use to remind yourself? Obviously, for you, you're a founder. You're a technologist. You're an engineer. You have a bunch of different kind of inputs. Is there anything there? Is there kind of a point of view or a quote that you remember or you draw inspiration from besides the keep calm and build on that you obviously shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this pretty much in Rue internet. There's this kind of funny quote, which is "You're a developer," which people use every time. Is like, well, why my computer doesn't work? Why can't you fix it? You're a developer. And so I just love using that because it kind of encompasses this idea that people just put a label on things and then kind of just use that label independent of the context and not thinking of like what is the specific things are. And I think just like remembering to not do that and remembering that like how actually detrimental can that be is important. And yeah, that's I don't know. For me, every time I use it, it's kind of find interesting like sarcasm in that.
It's so funny. I can only imagine how many of the 5,000 Telegram groups you shared earlier you've probably shared that in. I want to start next with, a little bit of a retrospective kind of question. And with this, the idea is the question that I want to ask is if you could go back to the start of your career and you could give yourself a piece of advice, or you could just whisper words of wisdom, or maybe it's even just a reminder that you'd give yourself back when you were first getting started, is there anything you would tell yourself, and what would you tell yourself and why?
I mean, ship fast. Honestly, that's that's the main thing. It's like, I mean, I think it's velocity. It will be hard. That's like, it's not easy. It will be hard, but it's about perseverance at that point, and then velocity is always the important piece because it's also like if you don't have velocity, then you lose momentum. You yourself then feel down as well, and so like velocity is also kind of allows you to kind of overcome some of your own mental blocks.
Yeah. I love that. It feels like, maybe the sports analogy would be train hard, but if you're building something, it's just ship fast. Ship fast. It's the same general idea. If you had to distill down your philosophy of building a company, and obviously, just to be super clear, Near is not a company. It's a decentralized project at this point. So maybe a better phrased as if you had to distill your philosophy of building a great decentralized project or decentralized ecosystem, what would that be, and how would you try to boil that down into a few words?
High level, small, agile teams that are kind of aligned on a single vision, aligned on a single kind of global goal, but are able to execute independently. And so the funny part is it's not actually that different from Amazon's. And so and to some extent some other successful companies. But yeah, I think like for ecosystem, it's especially true is that by kind of decentralizing, you're able to execute faster because you have more of this different kind of nodes in the ecosystem, right? They kind of running with their own speed, but then they're all independent. They can work together and they'll work together when it makes sense. But at the same time, they don't need to, and so that leads for them to be able to run faster. And like coming from Google, where you actually have a lot of the same concepts of like open source internally. Like internally, everyone can see everybody's code. You can kind of contribute to it. You can build on top of each other's services. But you need to get into this kind of company to be able to participate in that. But because of this, you kind of have this like very closed mindset in the sense that you have so much stuff internally that it's really kind of hard to go outside. It's hard to listen to a customer. It's hard to work with somebody externally. And so a lot of the philosophy that I ideally want in the ecosystem, obviously it's evolving beyond me in many ways, is this open Google model, right? Is like the same kind of, everybody shares the same goals, there's the same, culture, but it's open. Anybody can join. And also as a person who's working on any of this kind of teams, you're open to ideas, open to working with, users and this community. And so in turn, you like not fixed into like, hey, I need to work with this other team on doing blah. Like if that doesn't make sense, right? You can always kind of do something differently.
Yeah. I love that way of describing it. It's like the open Google model, which obviously makes sense when you share some of that context. And I love too using the word node because obviously in the blockchain sense, it kind of works. You've got nodes in terms of computers and compute power, but there's also the kind of human aspect of what you're building in the ecosystem and having a bunch of nodes that can all make independent decisions but are aligned on where they're going. It's super powerful. Is there a book, article, or paper that you love that you think more people should read? And obviously, we're talking about crypto. You can point to a specific crypto paper if that's it. You can also just share a general book, and it can even be one of those biographies. What comes to mind?
Extreme ownership. Listen in audiobook.
That's a very good one, and that really makes sense for the decentralized model. I want to ask one more question. I typically don't do this. What was that a major, I don't know, input or an inspiration that you drew on when you were thinking about this decentralized community and ecosystem you're building? Or is this more just around Near in particular or just a general philosophy?
You mean the book, the
Yeah,
ownership?
yeah, yeah.
No, I think it's more a general philosophy. I think generally the people who take on ownership of things become owners. And in a way, like I think in decentralized world it's more important than in centralized world because in centralized world it kind of all rolls up to, potentially the final owner, to CEO or to whatever. In decentralized world, you don't have final owner, right? So in a way, every person or every of this kind of sub project or what a regional hub or whatever is an owner of themselves, and so they need to take on ownership in a way for the whole ecosystem. And so that's important, I think, to propagate that as a culture. But I think it's important even in, as they shown in the book, it's important even in a very centralized entity like army to have that.
Yes.
And so
Yeah, pairs really well with. I'm right now in the middle of Skin in the Game by Nassim Taleb. And, he's a polarizing figure. Some people like him, some people don't like him. I think the fact that he wrote an entire book examining skin in the game and, because it's very tightly coupled with extreme ownership, it just saying, if you have to share both on the upside and downside of your decisions, you're obviously, you're going to make much better decisions and you're going to, I think, approach things very differently. Okay, a few final questions. One, is there a tiny habit or practice that you do that has had a positive impact on your life? Or maybe is there a tiny habit that has had the most positive impact on your life? This can be meditation, can be starting out your day in a certain way. What comes to mind?
my start of the day is pretty boring. Just get a coffee. I think nothing super like can point out. I think running is probably one of those things that is definitely a like I think a lot of people hate running, including me, but the process of one step at a time is true about everything. And so running is kind of a really good example of that, where you know it's, yeah, you want to run this like long distance marathon, half marathon, whatever, but it's still one at a time. It's one step at a time. So it's the same, if we're building a company, building a project, building anything, yeah, your vision is huge, but you need to do things one step at a time. So not be afraid of that.
Yeah, I love that for you. It's got like a philosophical take. What is your favorite way to waste an hour? And I think what we're getting at there is like a guilty pleasure, and it can be a nerdy guilty pleasure. It can be reading. It can be what comes to mind, and what's your favorite way to waste an hour?
So for a while, I was doing reading a lot of kind of science fiction, fantasy type of books, and yeah, usually like to limit my waste time, so I don't like spend a whole night reading. I would read one chapter at a time. So there's like this websites where authors actually publish one chapter per some period of time, and so you read like few books in parallel, one chapter at a time, and so you like limit the scope of your of your time because the book doesn't exist yet.
Yes, that's right. So you're
So
literally getting it in real time. It's almost like block by
yeah,
block, chapter by chapter.
exactly.
Do you have a favorite science fiction book?
I mean, a lot of science fiction I read is in Russian, and so there is like Monday Starts on Friday book, or Monday Starts on Saturday, which is kind of a classic Strugatsky brothers book from kind of classic Russian science fiction. There's a really interesting book which probably that one. I mean, this one is already probably I don't know how many people know, but there's some that I really like which there's no English translation, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think so far the if we talk about like kind of hard science fiction, the Russian one has been better quality than. I mean, to be clear, I like like Highline, I like all this as well. Like Asimov is really good. I mean, Foundation is obviously really good, but yeah, kind of there's definitely something about Russian language because it's so much richer actually that still gets me hooked.
Do you think that would ever be successful to try to translate that to English, or do you think it would be a significant challenge?
I think some things are translated, but I think the problem is it's kind of a combination of. I mean, I think like Strugatsky's problem is that it's a previous era, it's USSR era science fiction. It's like the context there is probably will be lost now. Even I think like just like I'm already probably last generation that was understanding what was going on there. I think the part of it is also just like again, from my perspective, English is very like to the point, which is great for business. It's an amazing language for business. Like even with my kind of Russian speaking, Ukrainian speaking colleagues who sometimes speak English,
Just to get to the point.
but yeah, because it's just like the terminology is present.
Sure.
All like there's no terminology, and but from perspective of like kind of describing a scene and creating this like feel of presence, I feel Russian has kind of more power.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean I'm
That's so cool. I hope at some point it gets translated, hope semi-successfully, so I can read it. We'll see. Last question. What is the most important lesson you've learned so far in life or business? So if you just had to have one takeaway to share with people.
I mean one step at a time is
It's
it's the same
universally
as like
applicable.
it's velocity, keep shipping one step at a time. It's all the same.
It all points to each other. It's like self-referencing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. That's the perfect note to end on. Everyone listening, watching, you can learn more about what Illia has been building along with many others for the last 4+ years, which is Near Protocol at near.org. You can also follow them on near.protocol. You can join their chat at near.chat. And if you're a developer listening, you can jump in and learn more in Near's developer docs at docs.near.org. And you can also follow Illia on Twitter. You share a bunch of great stuff at IL Black Dragon, which is a great handle, by the way. So thank you so much, Illia. I appreciate the time.
Thank you.